a la declaración de la vicepresidenta de la Comisión, alta representante de la Unión para Asuntos Exteriores y Política de Seguridad. Bienvenida, señora Mogherini, tiene usted la palabra.
Mogherini, you have the floor.
Por favor.
Thank you, President. Let me start by quoting the Article 36 that says that the High Representative of the European Union Foreign Affairs and Security Policy shall regularly consult the European Parliament on the main aspects and the basic choices of the common foreign and security policy and the common security and defence policy and inform it of how those policies evolve. He continues saying he, so probably it's not me, shall ensure that the views of the European Parliament are duly taken into consideration. Let me start by saying that I believe that in the last year we have managed to successfully do so. Having a regular consultation, hearing the updates, the evolvements, the implications for our policies in a constant dialogue. But for the sake of clarity and frankness, Mr. President, let me also say that I find it hardly acceptable that having 5 debates this evening in this hemicycle, we have 2 hours and a half delay. I think this is not respectful to your work and to my work. Having said that, let me say that this year it has been a very demanding one for our foreign policy. The deal with Iran has opened an intense phase for our European diplomacy, especially on Syria. After the attacks in Paris, a member state has resorted to Article 42.7 for the first time in our history, and we have debated this last time we met in this hemicycle. Our response to the refugee crisis has put together an unprecedented number of foreign policy tools, from Operation Sophia in the Mediterranean to the new Trust Fund for Africa, from financing schools or healthcare inside refugee camps to the economic compact for Jordan and Lebanon that we have remarkably put together for the London conference. The months ahead will be just as challenging. The foreign policy community is sometimes tempted to look at the electoral years in the United States as years of transition, but this is not a sabbatical year, and especially this is not a sabbatical year for the European Union. On the contrary, in some cases, we face a window of opportunity that could soon close down, and in others, inaction can make things terribly worse. In this debate, I will focus on our foreign policy's immediate priorities, as we will have time for a broader conversation on the medium and long term in our debate on the EU global strategy later in the night. And by the way, let me repeat once again that I see no particular reason for holding 2 debates in a row on topics that are completely similar. So I will ask you once again to avoid this kind of repetition and spend our time more logically and efficiently. Back to our priorities. Ending the great civil war in the Middle East and North Africa remains our most urgent commitment. It's a war that is being fought on different fronts, from the border between Syria, Iraq and Turkey to Yemen and Libya. Each of these fronts has its own history and its own actors, and probably also its own development. But in each one, the solution of the conflict has to come through national reconciliation. The defeat of Daesh, Al-Qaeda and all terrorist groups can only go hand in hand with these political processes. We're working hard for this to happen, and we are beginning to see some fragile first results. For them to consolidate, regional powers will need to stop feeding the war, support and encourage reconciliation, and head towards some kind of cold peace. What is happening in Syria used to seem impossible just a few months ago. The ceasefire is fragile, but it is largely holding. Humanitarian aid has reached a number of besieged areas, even if it's far from perfect. Staffan de Mistura is touring the region to build support for the talks. We are in constant contact, and I was in Geneva with him last month as I was meeting also the parties in the talks. And we coordinated our position on Syria with the G7 foreign ministers just yesterday in Japan. We need progress, and we need it quickly. Peace has a huge number of enemies. So that's why a strong sense of urgency has to drive our engagement. And at the same time, we will need the same patience that has led us here. The negotiations won't be easy, but perseverance has always paid off. The same will go for Libya. Most of the Presidency Council is finally in Tripoli after months of hard work to build fragile consensus around it. But it is only a starting point. All actors have to facilitate a peaceful transfer of powers to the new government. On our side, we are ready to help, and we are working with the Presidency Council and Farage on this. Because let me be very clear on this, as I have always been. Whatever we will do it with the Libyans. If they will ask for support, we will give them the support they need and want, be it on the humanitarian aid, on training of security forces, on judiciary or on border management. But the future of the country is in their hands. The stability of Libya, its prosperity, and the defeat of Daesh depend first and foremost on national unity. The solution to the conflict in Libya can only be political and can only be Libyan. Our responsibility is to consistently support. Third, on the region, Yemen. Because our focus in the coming months will obviously have to be on Syria and Libya, but we cannot afford to close our eyes on other crises, even if they don't make the headlines. The conflict in Yemen has caused a humanitarian tragedy at a massive scale, with 80% of the population that is now in need of humanitarian assistance. Instability is breeding ground for terrorist groups at the very crossroad among the Middle East and the Horn of Africa, the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. I met the UN Special Envoy last week, and we are working together on the ceasefire that has just begun last Sunday, accompanying this process with our concrete support to the preparation of negotiations and with a massive regional outreach. Let me finish on this first priority, on the Middle East peace process, because despite the lack of media attention, we cannot forget of the conflict in Israel and Palestine. With no progress towards peace, it is only a matter of time before the next escalation comes. Together with the rest of the Quartet and with our Arab partners' involvement, we are working on a report with also substantive recommendations on how to move beyond the deadlock towards a two-state solution. Sit and wait is simply not an option, and our work has never stopped, sometimes quiet, but always ongoing. The public opinion is not currently focusing on it. This doesn't mean we are stopping our work. Putting an end to these conflicts in Libya, in Syria, in Yemen, including also in the Middle East, building strong partnerships with our neighbours, but also with key actors in Africa and in Asia, will also be the best way to respond to the threat of terrorism in the region, in the world, and in the European Union. We can close the vacuum that Daesh uses in territories with no government. We can prevent radicalisation in partnership with Muslim-majority countries that are promoting coexistence and respect of diversity. We can increase the security of Europe by increasing and improving the security of our partners in the Middle East, in North Africa, in the Sahel, in Southeast Asia, in the Western Balkans. The second broad issue we need to deal with has much to do with conflicts in the Middle East. And yet, the issue of refugees and migrations will not stop, even with peace in Syria and Libya. Let's face it, big movements of people are the new normal, and again, we discussed this recently in this room. Walls won't stop the flows. They can only make the situation worse, opening new routes, destabilizing more countries, creating an incentive for human smugglers. We can only manage this together with our neighbours, not against them. For this reason, I was in Lebanon and Jordan last month and in Africa last week, and I will board one of our Operation Sophia's vessels that rescued just yesterday again hundreds of lives at the end of this week. The third field where we need to urgently engage is a self-evident need if we want to manage the two priorities I've just mentioned. That's relaunching multilateralism as the privileged format for dealing with all international issues. This might sound less urgent as long as you don't think about the concrete meaning of multilateral diplomacy. Multilateral diplomacy led to COP21 and to the Sustainable Development Goals. Multilateral diplomacy made possible our deal with Iran. It's the comprehensive approach, the win-win solutions, the rules-based scenario. It's the European way to foreign policy. And we will need more of this in the coming months, including on the very field of non-proliferation. The international community has shown unity in responding to North Korea's new tests. And I have just attended 2 important events on disarmament and nuclear security in Washington with President Obama and in Hiroshima at the G7 just yesterday. We were, for the first time ever, with the rest of the G7, honouring the memory of the victims of the atomic bomb. The discussion was positive, and it is in our common European interest to work for closer and deeper cooperation at international level on the issue of nuclear security, non-proliferation and disarmament. Let me include under the same headline, multilateralism and international cooperation, the issue of our relationship with Russia. On most of the files I have mentioned so far, on Iran, on Israel and Palestine, on Libya, and partially on Syria, the Russian leadership has shown some interest to cooperate with Europe and with the rest of the world. And we have decided, together with the European Union foreign ministers a few weeks ago, that we will engage with Russia in the fields where we have an interest to do so. Days ago, it was announced, and today confirmed with a date, I believe, a new meeting of the NATO-Russia Council after years when it was suspended. Now, does this mean that our relations with Russia can go back to normal? I believe my friend Jens Stoltenberg explained the NATO position with these words that I believe reflect very well where we are. There will be no return to business as usual until Russia again respects international law. End of the quote. Our European position was agreed unanimously in the Foreign Affairs Council just 1 month ago. We have all signed on 5 principles of our policy towards Russia. Selective engagement goes together with the implementation of Minsk, our relationship with our Eastern partners, the strengthening of our own resilience and enhanced support to the Russian civil society. I chaired that Foreign Affairs Council 1 month ago, and let me tell you that all member states are now on the same page on Russia as on most other topics. We will need more of the same unity to make our way through these difficult times. On all the issues I mentioned tonight, I believe we all share the exact same interests as Europeans. Our governments are starting to understand that, but our citizens already do. They know that we will either have a common European foreign policy, or we will have no real foreign policy at all, because it's only together that we have the tools and the weight that are needed in today's world. And it's the best answer to our people's need. I count on the continued support of this Parliament to manage to shape that effective common foreign security policy also in the years ahead. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, señor.